I'm so glad to get to be with you today. The International Foundation for Survival Research was started in 1983 to let people know about all the kinds of experiences that happen in people's lives that point to life beyond death, and the serious research about those. I would love to share some of my own personal experiences with you. First, I was at the table grading papers. I've always been a teacher. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, a voice came to me that said, "Check your breast." And it was so strong that I stopped what I was doing and I thought, well, it has been a while since I've done that monthly check that women are supposed to do. And within about 3 days, I found a little tiny lump in my breast. And within a week, I was having surgery to remove that breast. And the doctor said that it was one of the earliest he'd ever caught, and I didn't have to have chemo or radiation. And after I started thinking about that, I felt really strongly that someone had helped me. I didn't know if it could be an angel or a guide or my deceased dad or some loving entity, but I felt someone had really helped me. And so I talked to them and I said, "Whoever you are, I believe you saved my life. And I thank you. For some reason it wasn't my time, I guess. And whatever you tell me to do in the future, I will do. I promise." A few years later, I heard about a mental medium named Brian Hurst in LA, Southern California, and I went for a reading. And I followed some good guidelines that I think are really good to keep in mind. And one is, I didn't wear rings so he wouldn't get any ideas about whether I was married or not. I didn't use my name. I gave a false name, so there'd be no chance for any kind of research or anything to be done. And the most important thing is I didn't ask any questions. If a psychic is not for real, one of the things they often will do is say, "Do you have any questions?" And so many people will go ahead and say, "Do you see my deceased mother?" And then it's easy for that medium to say, "Well, yes, here she is." So it's best not to say anything. So I wasn't. And Brian Hurst gave me a cup of tea and started chatting about the weather. And I started thinking, what in the world is happening? I paid $75 for this reading. And in a moment he said, "We're just waiting for them to come." And then he said, "I know you're here for your father." Well, I hadn't told him that, but it was true, I was. He said, "But here comes Lena, and she wants me to tell you how much she loves you." Well, Lena was the deceased sister of my mother, Aunt Lena. Then a couple of minutes later he said, "Here comes your father." Wow, he sure does open his mouth really wide when he laughs. And sure enough, my dad did. He would go, "Ha ha ha." He said, "Your dad is trying to think of some specific things, so you'll know that it is your dad." First, he said, "Your dad said he had a strong connection to Germany." Well, when you go to a medium and they give you something that's accurate, that's called a hit. So that was a correct hit. But of course, there are a lot of people who have a strong connection to Germany. My dad had been quite ill in his early 20s when he happened to be visiting in Germany, and he'd had a burst appendix and peritonitis had set in. It was very, very serious, and he'd had 3 surgeries and had to stay an entire year in the hospital. So he definitely had a connection to Germany. The second thing the medium said was, "Your dad wants to know, do you remember the time that you went with him on the Eiffel Tower, but you only went halfway up?" And that was true. When I was about 13, I was with my mother and dad, and we went to the Eiffel Tower. And I think most people, when they visit the Eiffel Tower, kind of their goal is to go to the top. But we had gone halfway up and had had dinner. There was a restaurant there. And after we were through, my dad had said, "Do we really need to go to the top?" And we had said no. The third message or idea from Dad I thought was just amazing. Brian Hurst said, "Your father says Do you remember the Little Libra? Well, my dad had been really interested in astrology, and when I was young, he would talk about it. And one of the things he would say is, honey, your birthday is Gemini. So when you grow up and you're thinking about getting married, you might be interested in a man who's Libra or Aquarius. Well, I was 13 and I had my full height. I was 5'7" at that time. And my first boyfriend was about a foot shorter. He had taken a bus out to my house and we were going to go to a movie. And when my dad met him, he said, David, when is your birthday? And David said, October 7. And my dad said, oh, a Libra. So I thought those were amazing. A few years after that, I was in Los Angeles. I was driving over to meet a friend for coffee. And just as I pulled in and parallel parked the car, just as I'm turning off the ignition, my dad was there. I couldn't see him, but he was around, above my head and around me, as sure as anything. I felt his love and I said, Dad, is that you? And I got, yes. And I just sat there. I was shocked. I was in awe. And then I heard, again, it was quiet, but this strong voice, honey, it's done. And I'm so proud of you. And I said, did you say, honey, it's done? And I'm so proud of you? And then I got, yes. And then I just sat there and just luxuriated in his love and telling him how much I loved him. And then everything faded. I immediately wrote down all the details of what had just happened. And when I think back on it, why would he have said, honey, it's done? And I remembered that when I was young, another of his interests was things like ESP, PK, life after death. And he used to say, when I pass away, I will come to you. One way or the other, I will come to you, he said. Even if it's to break a chandelier, I will. So maybe he was saying, it's done. It meant everything to me. About 6 months later, I was getting ready to go to Dallas to visit my mother, Texas, where I had grown up. And Mother said, honey, when you come, Dr. Walter Bowles wants to see you. Well, Walter had been my dad's best friend, and they used to do arbitration cases back in Walter's backyard through the years. But I had no idea why would he want to see me. So I went to his home, we sat down. He said, Elizabeth, you know I'm a logical person, right? I said, of course. He said, you know I wouldn't be subject to flights of fancy. I said, well, of course I know that. And he said, well, I've been wanting to tell you that your dad came to me after he died. I said, really? He says, yes, he came right here. And he talked about the same place where my dad came to me. He says, right here. And he said, he was here sure as the world. And he said, each time I was in the backyard working on arbitration, and he said, I have a tendency to get kind of low now and then, and I was feeling a little bit on the low, depressed side. And each time your dad would be supporting me like a cheerleader. He'd say, come on, Walter, come on, get out of that, you can do this. He said it happened the first time, a few days after he passed away, the second time, several weeks later, and then several months later was the third time. I thought that was so wonderful. Several years later, I was moving some books around, just thinking about where I wanted different books to be. And all of a sudden, this really, really strong thought came. Go to law school. And I laughed. The last thing I would ever want to be is an attorney. I had been around attorneys all my life. My dad had been a professor of law. My mother had put herself through night law school. Of course I didn't want to be an attorney. I'm a teacher. But I wrote down on a piece of paper, go to law school, question mark, smiley face, and I remembered my promise. So I found a law school right down the street, Whittier College School of Law, which was located then in Mid-Wilshire, and I enrolled. And I went to law school round the clock through the summers, and I gave it my all. I was certainly not a great student. I was right in the middle. I thought it was very, very hard. It was not me, but I tried my best. When I passed, I thought, okay, I did exactly what I was told. I went to law school. Now I'm ready to go back to my teaching. But that's where I made a huge mistake, I think. And that is, I listened to my friends. I didn't listen to my guidance. My guidance just said, go to law school. But they would say, well, of course you're going to take the bar. Of course you're going to take the bar and be an attorney. You went to law school. So I listened. I took the bar, and I did not pass it. So I remember thinking, okay, I didn't pass it. I'm done. Through with this idea of law. Again, listen to my friends. Of course you're going to take it again. You didn't pass it the first time, but you'll pass it the second time. Well, for the second bar exam is 3 days long. I thought, okay, this time I'm going to stay in a hotel where the bar will be held, and that way I'm not having to commute every morning, and maybe I'll do better. So I was in the little gym in the hotel by myself, happened to be alone. I was riding the bike, and I just spoke out loud, and I said, whoever you are, you told me to go to law school, and I did. I did my best. If I do not pass the bar this time, I'm going to let it go and know that I did what you told me. And then I passed. I absolutely was not happy that I passed. In fact, I was stressed. But again, I followed it through the, quote, logic. I got a job in litigation for the county. I did that briefly. It was terrible because I'm not a fighter. I did then some wills and trusts part-time for a few years. And then I finally went back to my love, which is teaching. Why was I told to go to law school? Why would I be told that? And I don't know. And maybe someday I would know. My dad, being in law, he was also very protective of me. Both my parents were. And I feel that somehow, maybe he knew that within a year my marriage would be ending, and the stress that maybe I would be feeling. And I believe that he knew that if I thought I was being guided by him or by angels or some loving spirit, that I would give law school my absolute best, which would mean doing everything that would end up keeping me on an even keel during that difficult time. I would exercise, I would get lots of sleep, I would eat the right thing, and that's what I did. During law school, one of the habits that I had is every afternoon I would go to this restaurant nearby and order an amazing big piece of chocolate cake with all the chocolate icing, and they would warm it up. And if you've ever had that, it's absolutely yummy. And one of the days that I was driving into the parking lot of the restaurant and just stopped the car, I got this really, really strong thought: cake will not solve your emotional problems. Well, that particular day, I went home and didn't eat cake. But I must admit, I didn't listen to that bit of advice, and I've loved chocolate all through the years. Well, there came a time in Dallas when my mother began having strokes. She'd have what they called mini strokes, and then another one, and pretty soon, over a several-month period, she wasn't herself anymore. She didn't look like herself, and she didn't say anything many days at all, or maybe just one word, maybe yes, or maybe thank you. And I got really concerned when the hospice people told me you know, it's not going to be very long before your mother's body is start to really break down and she'll be in an awful lot of pain. So starting then, instead of my usual prayers for her health, for her getting well, having a great life, I began in my own prayers just saying, Dear God, if it is your will, please let her go. The next day, I was walking past her bed, and she looked at me, and she turned to me, and she said, You want me to? And I was sure she was about to say, die. You want me to die? And that somehow she could not bring herself to say that. And I said, No, Mama. I said, I want whatever you want. If the people are telling me, the nurses, that your body is going to start having an awful lot of pain. And I thought maybe you would want to go and see your mama and your papa and dad. But whatever you want is what I want. But after that moment, I became convinced that somehow she could read my mind. One of the things that hospice told us is that people who are about to die have a little bit of say as to whether they die with some people around them or as to whether they might prefer to wait and die at a time when they're alone in the room. So I needed to go and have my hair done, and I remembered what the hospice had said. So I said, Mama, I'm going to go and have my hair done. I'll be back in 1 hour, because the salon was just a couple of blocks away. So I left. I went to the salon. The lady's working on my hair, and she is called to the phone. The person who's working on my hair is called to the phone. So I'm sitting there for a moment waiting, and all of a sudden, and this was totally unplanned, I had no idea what was going to happen, I started running, just darting up to the reception desk. And while I'm running, I'm thinking to myself, what in the heck is going on? And as soon as I got up there, the receptionist is looking up at me, and I said, I guess I was wanting to make a call home because my mother is so ill, but I said, that's silly, I'm going to be there in about 20 minutes. And she said, no, that's okay, here, use my cell phone. So I called home. The line was busy. It turns out that the hospice nurses were being called because my mother had just passed away. After my hair was done and I drove home and pulled in and got out of the car, I noticed a hospice nurse standing in the door looking at me. I wasn't surprised because they were there every couple of days now. And as I walked toward her, she said, Elizabeth, your mother has passed. And at the very moment she said that, something hit my head, hit the top of my head firmly. And all of a sudden, I just felt peaceful. I felt so peaceful. And I remember saying, thank you, God. And I went into the room where Mama's body was. I shut the door. And I said, I believe that you've already gone toward the light. And I love you. And please watch for your Mama, your Papa, and Dad. I love you so much. After she passed away, I decided to spend a few days in Malibu, California, a little motel. And one of the days I went to a cafe, ordered something. I'm not a person who criticizes the servers in a restaurant. I've never sent food back. I don't believe in criticizing. But this particular day, for some reason, I was really irritable. And when the young man came and brought my plate, I said, this is a huge plate. Why is there such a huge plate for such a tiny little bit of food? And then when my server came, I said the same to her. I said, why would you need such a huge plate, that's such a small entree here? And then after I started eating, I started thinking, that was so mean. Why did you say that? And so I beckoned to her and she came over. And I said, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry I talked like that to you. And would you please tell the young man who brought the plate that I'm so sorry? And she said, yes. And then she said, that's the first time anyone ever said that. I said, oh, you mean to say they're sorry? And she said, yes. I said, I bet you get a lot of rude people here. She said, yes. And I said, we're supposed to all be good to each other. And then as I started to walk down the hallway, here came this young man who had brought me the plate. So as I'm walking toward him, I said, did she tell you what I said, that I'm really sorry? And as he walked toward me, he tapped me on the shoulder and said, I think you're very sweet. And all of a sudden, joy, 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 joy was all through my body. All I could feel was joy. I didn't know what in the world was happening. I paid. I went outside. It was still just in my body, filling my body with joy. I've never had anything like that. I sat in the car and I thought, what is going on? And at first I wasn't concerned. I was just curious. But it seemed as if my body just was filling up with joy. And then I did get a little worried. I thought, is my body about to burst? And as soon as I started thinking that, then gradually it all faded and faded and faded. Years after that, I had another experience that was really strong emotion, although I have no idea what it could have meant. It was my first day volunteering at a free kitchen for the homeless in San Rafael, California. And I had finished my first day there. And as I was leaving, shut the door, left, walked a few yards away, I started crying as hard as I have ever cried. And I got this really strong thought, I am finally home. These are my people. And I cried. I got in the car to drive home. I cried the whole way home. And when I got home, I lay down on the sofa and cried more. Again, I don't know what it meant, but I believe it meant something to me. I noticed that over the last few years, there's been something different. I had an experience that had a whole different quality that I'd love to tell you about. Someone I really loved had passed away, and it had been a few days. And I happened to look at my emails, and there was an email there from someone very unexpected who had something really beautiful to say about my work. And I was so surprised and so happy that I said, thank you, God. And I just felt it with so much love. And at that moment, everything slowed down. Everything was quiet and soft. And I felt so peaceful and like such a quiet joy. And I walked into the living room and I got down on my knees and I said, dear God, my work is good. My children love me. It's all done. Thank you. I felt as if everything was complete in that moment. Then gradually, as the hours started going by, I started wondering what is going on because things continued to be very slow. I looked at my to-do list for the day, and instead of hurrying the way I normally might have, I would look at it and go, oh, now we will do this. And then I would take care of that. And now we will do this. But gradually what I think happens to a lot of people that stops an experience is the mind starts coming in and asking, what is this? How long is this going to last? What is going on? And as soon as I did that, it faded. I'm so glad to have gotten to be with you today. This field of parapsychology is starting to be taken much more seriously by mainline scientists. It's taken a long time, but they're beginning to acknowledge the research and all of these kinds of experiences. There are many more kinds that I haven't mentioned that point to life beyond death. And they seem to be pointing to a deeper consciousness that we all share, and that the human potential is a whole lot greater than anyone had ever imagined. Thank you so much for being with me today. Bye-bye.